Appreciate it, Scott. Yeah, I tell you, we, as a church and just over the years, nothing has really impacted my life more than working with men. That's my favorite thing to do. And so in any season, because you get to talk real, Steve and I were talking last week, there's a fun that you get to have as a speaker in this audience. Because, you preach on the weekend, you got to think everybody, from the grandmother all the way down. We get here and you can just go, no, we're going to cut out all that crap. Let's talk about what is real with that. And this morning, I'm excited. We're doing this series, How God Makes Men, and we based it off of some work that Patrick Morley's done. He's done a book with it, and he walks through some big idea themes, and we're taking those themes, each of us as speakers, kind of making them our own and applying them to this context. And especially this morning, as I think about it and think about the struggles that men have and what they face out of that. One of my sons, who's a senior in college, we were talking a few weeks ago, and we saw this thing with Navy SEALs training. And if the Navy SEALs, the excruciating training they go through. And by design, they're trying to get guys to tap out. You come, you place your helmet down, you ring the bell 3 times, you're gone. Because it's just too much. And my son was like, Dad, do you think you could do that? And probably earlier in life, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm looking at him like, I don't know, Drew, that is a different breed. I mean, my level of respect for those guys and what they go through, and honestly, not just in the training of what they face and how they serve us in so many different ways. But I look at that whole process of just weeding guys out, and then you kind of have this final group, they are the SEALs, they're the guys. And I often think, especially when it comes to just being a man, we can kind of get an image in our mind of that process of are the regular guys getting weeded out, and then we've got this kind of category of guys, those are real men. Man, those are the guys stand head and shoulders. And what I've found is almost all of us will weed ourselves out. Because somewhere along the way we go, did I really make the cut? Am I really the man I'm supposed to be? It's one of the things I hate. I think the enemy uses all the time to mess with a guy's mind. Of somehow there's this mythical manhood out there that we're trying to reach for. And when you get behind the curtain, no guy really feels like he arrived with it. One of the things I love about Christianity, God's not trying to weed any guys out. If anything, He's committed to every guy, no matter how you're wired, no matter how you're shaped. He looks at you and says, no, you're a man. I made you a man. But to become the man that God's called us to be, somebody else has to invest in you. Real men are not born. They're made. They're made by God, and He uses other men in the process. And that's why what we're doing, that's your commitment to get here, to be here early, to do that is so important with that. If you look in your notes with it, you can see with that, many men are confused or conflicted about what it means to be a man. There's no way around it. Many men and men in culture with it, and you can go all the way back historically. If you look at the historical trends, you go from a training that young boys had with the Industrial Revolution. It was unbelievable what it launched in the industry, but it was one of the first times that a young boy went from working side by side with dad. Up to that time, you had tradesmen, you had farmers, you had different people. A young boy saw his dad at work. Suddenly, a young boy saw his dad go to work. And the gap that created in it. And then you had in the early 20th centuries, you had World War I and World War II, and the emotional stunting of men. That greatest generation that all of us, we celebrate the greatest generation. It was interesting, you remember when Saving Private Ryan came out? How many guys of that greatest generation, when they saw that movie, started talking for the first time about some of the things they faced? And as sociologists have looked at it, especially the impact on young guys, baby boomers who came off of that, next generation with that, of dads who came home and who had faced such trauma, they just had to shut it down. They were not just the greatest generation, they were also the silent generation. and it had an impact. There's a reason you had the acting out that you saw in the 60s and 70s and the impact with it. And then you add a social revolution that we've experienced over the last 30 years, some of it which has been really good. That we looked at some of the inequities for women and go, man, women need to have same opportunities with that. And I'm thankful for that. In the process, though, a lot of times men became the punching bag of that. And so you look at the impact overall of a system that boys get expelled from preschool 5 times more often than girls. Elementary school, boys are diagnosed with learning disorders 4 times as often. By 8th grade, huge numbers of boys read below basic level. Males graduate high school at a lower rate, and now at college, it's about 60% female, 40% male in the graduation rate and beyond. Most graduate programs are predominantly much higher percentage female now than males. Now, do I say all that because I go, oh man, I want to go back to a day where we flip-flop it? No, I really don't. I'm so thankful that we're giving women the opportunity to be even stronger women. But hear me, you know what strong women want? Strong men. And if we don't look at it and go, man, we've got to address it. When I see this stat, young men are 3 times more likely to kill themselves than young women. Margaret Mead, the famous anthropologist, she studied cultures through it. She was an atheist. So she's not a Christian anthropologist. Here's her thing. She made this observation. She said, the chief responsibility of every society is to find healthy roles for its men. And here's why she said that. When I study cultures, and I look at the deterioration of a culture, a society, a people group, the main trigger that she was looking for on it is when men no longer have a healthy role, when the men go unhealthy, man, the culture goes unhealthy. And so that's why, my commitment of no matter what's going on in our church, no matter what season we're in, we have to invest in other men. And I say that with it because God makes men through other men who choose to invest in them. That's how God makes men. They don't just happen. Other men have to choose to invest in them. And in that process, he does that. And here's the big idea for this week. Big idea of this whole theme is God makes men by a process of calling, equipping, and sending us so we can call, equip, and send others. And so as you look at this process, we're going to walk through that this morning. And I want to look at it in 2 ways. One, we're going to look how Jesus did that in Peter's life. How Jesus called, equipped, and sent him out. And then think about it, go, okay, how am I doing the same thing? Because if God makes men through men, and I'm called to invest in other men, then I need to learn both in his model, but also think about, man, how am I putting it in action? And that's one of the things we do every time we have BetterMan, and that the reason we do table group, the reason we go in it is you guys have enough, there's enough great teaching out there. You can listen to 1,000 podcasts, you can listen to something in your car all the time. Hope you are. That's all good. The best part of this, though, is we actually put it in practice right here. And we invest in each other in that process. So let's look at Jesus and Peter. How did he do it? The first thing that you see, Jesus calls Peter to follow him. There's a calling. So God calls men in a following. And as I looked at it, I want to step back, not just Peter. I think there's 3 key ways that God calls people, and specifically men. The 3 main ways that he calls them into a relationship with himself. Here's the first way. For a lot of guys, it's a continuation. God builds on what they believe from the earliest age. Some of you guys, you're a continuation guy. From your earliest age that you can remember, if you look in the Bible, Timothy is one of those. Timothy, when Paul writes Timothy, he says, I'm reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now I'm sure dwells in you. I mean, Timothy's 3rd generation, his grandmother, his mother, from the earliest age, he was being trained in it. And there's a lot of guys, and I meet guys in the church, from your earliest age, you were a part of the church. You can't remember a time, really, that you weren't a Christian or around Christianity or involved in church. And so there's this continuation. And sometimes I'll meet a guy, because we talk about, man, when did you come to Christ? And I'll meet somebody every so often, and they go, yeah, I can't really remember when it happened. It was just always a part of my life. And they kind of doubt it, like, oh man, is something wrong with me? And I go, no, that's great. This has always been a part of your life. I'll meet other guys and they go, I don't really have much of a Christian story. I mean, I've always been a Christian. And I go, you have the best Christian story. Better than the guy, that I was on drugs and I did all these things. As great as that is, man, the health in your life, it'd be like a guy going, I really can't speak to physical health much. I mean, my family, we always exercise and we always ate right. I've always been in shape my whole life. It'd be like, dude, you're the one that should be teaching all of us. And so I would just say that if you're a continuation guy, that this has always been a part of your life, man, you ought to go back. I don't know who your Lois, your Eunice, or who was investing in you. Man, you ought to thank them. Because God used them. Now, you go to the other end of the spectrum, and you've got guys like Paul, that it was confrontation. It's confrontation. God uses the events of life to force a man to deal with them. They're the opposite end. They were against it. And you know the story of Apostle Paul. He thought he was doing the right thing. He's persecuting the church. He's headed to Damascus to go throw people in jail. And on his way there, Jesus just face to face. Falling to the ground, Paul hears a voice. He says, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? He said, who are you, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus whom you're persecuting. It's one of the most famous stories of a guy who literally, his whole life's going this direction, and God goes, this is wrong. You're doing it the wrong way. And he's radically changed overnight. And I love those. Some of you guys are those stories. Man, God got a hold of you. God confronted you. God used circumstances in your life. Sometimes God uses marriage circumstances. Sometimes he uses business circumstances. Sometimes he uses moral circumstances. You have these different circumstances. My son, he's got a couple of roommates, and I'm talking to him right now, and because of what they're going with relationally, it's given this great opportunity because their world is blowing up, and I'm able to say to them, this is not working. Don't do it this way. You got one side, the continuation, the other side, the confrontation. Third way, and this is Peter. Peter is confirmation. Confirmation. And this is where God proves himself to be true in the life of a man. He's not just like a continuation baby, he's had it all along. He's not confronting, he's not like against it. But there came this point that he goes, is this guy really real? Is Jesus real? In Peter's life, Peter had heard about it. He had followed Jesus a little bit with his brother, but he was still kind of deciding, is this guy the real deal? And he's out fishing one night. And I love this story because Jesus uses it. You look, and Jesus said, and when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put out in the deep and let down your nets for a catch. And Simon answered, Master, we toiled all night and took in nothing, but at your word, I'll let them down. So here's Peter. He's a fisherman by trade. He's fished all night, which is when you catch fish. The sun's up now. Peter knows, if we didn't catch anything at night, we are certainly not going to catch anything now. And now I got the carpenter telling the fisherman how to fish. But at your word, okay, I'll be nice to you. I'm just doing this to be nice to you because you don't know what you're talking about. Look at it. He puts down the net. And when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish. Their nets were breaking. They signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled up both boats so that they began to sink. It's unbelievable the catch in it. Look at Peter's response. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees saying, depart from me, for I'm a sinful man. I love this part that Jesus has been teaching him. He hears the teaching of Jesus, but Jesus shows up in his world. He knows fishing. He knows how this is supposed to go. And Jesus proves himself in Peter's backyard, in Peter's world. And the moment he does, it humbles Peter. That he goes, oh man, depart from me. That's his way of saying, I don't deserve you. I'm a sinful man. If you read it, James and John and Peter, the rest of that passage, after that moment, they left everything and they followed him. There's this confirmation that he really is Jesus. He really is true. And I'll tell you, in guys' life, I've seen those three play out. I've seen some guys, and some of you here, you're a continuation. You've known it your whole life. Some of you, it was pretty radical. It was a confrontation with it. And some of you, at some point, you'd seen it, you'd heard about it, but Jesus confirmed himself that it's true. I always love the story of Lew Wallace. He was the governor of New Mexico over 100 years ago. Brilliant guy. And in his brilliance, he was agnostic. His wife was a Christian, but he was totally agnostic. And there was a man named Ingersoll who was the famous agnostic of that day, and he came to Wallace. He goes, Wallace, you're a good researcher. Why don't you write a book proving that there never was a historical Jesus? And Wallace that's a brilliant idea. So he starts working on this book. He goes, tells his wife, I'm writing this book. And he starts working on the book. He worked on it for several years, starts putting all these things together. In his own words, he said, I finally came face to face that Jesus was as real as Julius Caesar, as Virgil. He goes through all the historical characters. And then finally he goes, oh, if that was true, wonder if what he did was true. And he declared to the world, yeah, I've done my research, and now I'm a follower of Jesus. Much to the dismay of his friends and political and everybody around. He did end up writing a book. He wrote the book Ben-Hur. I don't know if you remember the story. And woven through the whole thing is the story of Christianity because of what God did in his life. As you hear that, here's the thing I would say for every guy. No matter how Jesus reveals himself to you, every man must make the choice of whether he's going to follow him. It doesn't matter how he reveals. At some point, you got to make the choice. And maybe you're here today and God's using your circumstances to confront you a little bit. Man, I'd say give up that fight. Maybe you're here today and you have been around it your whole life, but you kind of have never progressed in that journey, that continuation, because you haven't owned it. It's time to own it. And maybe you're here today and you've been investigating and Jesus keeps confirming in different ways. And I would trust that. Guys, he's real. But you have to make the choice just like Peter. Are you going to follow him or not? And make that costly decision in it. Second thing you see, Jesus didn't just call, he equips. He equips with intentionality. Sometimes you can read these stories and it feels just like random events. You know, they did this and they would do this miracle and that. If you study it, there's an intentionality of Jesus' journeys. There's an intentionality of what he's teaching. There's an intentionality of how he reveals himself. How early on he's very hesitant, like I'm not going to let everybody know. He knows exactly what he's doing. And there's an intentionality in the way that he equips them. If you look at it, look what he does in equipping, because we want to learn from that. First, he invests in him relationally. They spend time together. They spend 3 years together. And if you read those stories, most of the time the disciples are a pain in the butt. They really are. Most of the time, they're blowing it. They're making it worse. They don't understand what's going on. I can only imagine. Think about it. You're the Son of God. You're here. You know you have a mission. You're going to come. You're going to die on a cross. You're going to rise from the dead. That's why you're here. And yet, he carves out this time for 3 years before he accomplishes the greatest act in human history and says, as great as that act is, if I'm not investing in these guys, man, how's this thing going to grow like it's supposed to? And so they spent time together. They walked together. They talked together. And I'll just say this. You're never going to be shaped by another guy, and you're never going to invest and shape another guy if you don't spend time with them. We love settings like this. It's so much easier. Man, we can teach in a big group. As great as it is to pass information like this, it doesn't shape a life like time together. And I think about it with my sons especially. Man, I have to look up every so often and go, am I calendaring good time with them? Am I letting a device shape their life more than me? Because they spent more time with it. Jesus spent time with him as he invests in him relationally. He also mentors him strategically. Now again, think of Jesus' strategy. If you read through the Gospels, Jesus is teaching crowds, then he teaches 12, his disciples, and then out of the 12, there's several times he teaches 3. There's a strategy out of that. He knew full well, hey, as great as it is to teach the big crowds, and I'll do that at a time, there's other times I got to pull away and I got to teach these 12. And then even among the 12, he says, hey, as great as it is to have a group of 12, I got to have 3 guys. I got to have a few that I'm really focusing on. He's very strategic about that. Look how he does it. First, it's through teaching, general and specific. General and specific. He generally teaches to the crowd, and then every so often he pulls aside. If you read through the Gospels, he pulls the disciples aside and he goes, all right, now let me apply this specifically to you. Let me tell you what this really means. And I get convicted about this. As a pastor, I'm teaching a lot, and so I get the privilege. My kids are hearing a lot when I'm teaching, but it hit me one day. Do I do follow-up with them like Jesus did with his disciples? Do I pull a guy aside? When we do groups, this is why we do questions afterwards. So that you're not just hearing general teaching, there's some specific application that we go, hey, let's talk about how does this apply to your life? He's very intentional about that. Secondly, he does training. He moves from doing for them to doing with them. One of the key things Jesus did, if you read early on, he's doing everything for them. He's doing all the miracles. He's doing everything. And then as you read later, he starts sending them out. Hey, you guys go out. You guys go out and heal. You guys do these different, and they come back, and most of the time they've made a mess of it. It would have been easier for Jesus to just go do it. What is he doing though? He's going, okay, I'm not going to be here. And if I always do everything for them, they're not going to become the leaders and men they need to be. This is a great principle, by the way, at work. You can learn out of this. Every time you got to ask yourself, am I always the one doing everything for everybody, or do I pull back? Do I pull off center stage enough to create some space to let them step forward? It's a great thing if you've got sons, if you've got children, as you're investing in them, you're going to be doing a lot for them. There comes a point in life, it'll slow you down to let them do it. Be the best thing you can do, though, is create that space that you're not just doing for them, you do it with them. Third part of that, there's correction. There's a willingness to address what is wrong in the moment. He's willing to speak into it. One of the key moments, Peter has this great declaration in Matthew 16 where he says, Jesus says, who am I? And he says, oh, man, you're the Son of God. And he goes, oh, man, you're Peter. You're the rock. He encourages him. And a moment later, Jesus says, I need to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to die on a cross. And Peter, it says, I love in the passage, he pulls him aside. I don't want to embarrass Jesus. Kind of pulls him aside. Hey, Jesus. This whole dying and all that really doesn't play well. Not what messiahs do. It's almost like, now that I'm the rock, I'm the man, I got to help Jesus out here. He's kind of getting off. And Jesus looks at him as one of the strongest passages in that. He turned to Peter and says, get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you're not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. He's willing in the moment. A moment ago, I was praising you. But dude, this is satanic thinking. This is the opposite of what God's called us to. And here's what I love in his correction. He uses a scalpel. He doesn't use an axe. He doesn't just he doesn't even, because here's what we do a lot of times. Somebody does something and we call the whole group together. Hey, it's been brought to my attention that some people are doing, some guys, sometimes with the team with that, and I go, that's a pansy way to address it. Address it with the person. Address it directly. Address it in the moment and have guts enough to look at it and go, hey, you can't think like that. He does it with the scalpel. He loves him enough that he will correct him. But then you follow it up. There's also restoration. Failure was never final. And failure is never final with Peter. Peter, who screwed up about as much as any of Jesus' followers. Peter, who the one who said, I will follow you no matter what. And he was the one that, if you know the story, he's the one that denied him in the most blatant ways. Even after Jesus told him, he said, you're going to deny me 3 times that night. You would think if you had that kind of warning, that's the one thing I'm not going to do. For the night's over, he did it. And if you read in John 21, Peter's response to that, he said, I'm going fishing. Even after he finds Jesus has been resurrected, they've seen it and all that, he wakes up one day and he goes, you know what, I'm going fishing. And if you look at that verb in the Greek, it's an ongoing thing. All those nets and the boats and everything that he had put away in that earlier chapter, he pulls them back out again. And I don't think Peter had given up on who Jesus was. I think Peter had given up on Peter. That, man, this guy, he just rose from the dead. He's unbelievable. But I'm the guy that blows it the most. So I'm going to go back to what I know how to do, and I'm going to go fishing. And if you read the story, how does Jesus show up again? He does the same miracle he did when he called Peter that last time. He waits till morning. He yells out, says, hey, why don't you put your nets in? Peter yells out, we've been fishing all night. A little deja vu, isn't it? And then they pull up the net, and as soon as they pull it up, Peter goes, oh, it's the Lord. This isn't some random guy on the beach. And he swims in, and Jesus, he's built a bonfire there. And it's a charcoal fire, by the way. It's the only time John mentions charcoal fires 2 places. One, that morning with Jesus. The other place is the 3rd time that Peter denied, he was standing by a charcoal fire. And the girl said to him, hey, aren't you? And he goes, I'm not with him. You don't think the sensory of sitting around that fire again and it brings it all back? And if you know the story, what does Jesus do? 3 times he says, hey, Peter, you love me? You love me? Love me? Because you denied me 3 times. Guys, Jesus is very strategic in everything he does, even in restoration. And I love the 3rd time after it when he does, he said to him 3rd time, Peter, do you love me? And Peter was grieved because he said a 3rd time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. I'm not done with you, Peter. Failure is not final, Peter. You look at that process and you go, I don't know how to mentor a guy. Look at the things Jesus did. He was teaching. You go, I'm not a teacher. There's a lot of teaching. Listen to a podcast. Do a study like this together. He was training. It's like, okay, do something with them. He was correcting where needed. And sometimes guys are dying for somebody to speak in their life. And then he was restoring. Because, see, we're not the Navy SEALs that, oh, you blew it, ring the bell, you're out. Man, God is about, oh, you blew it? All right, let me help you because I'm not done with you. God's not done with you. You look at that part of it. What's the next thing that Jesus did? He equips Peter with intentionality through encouragement. He sees the man he would become, and he speaks into his life to bring out the best. In both cases, he looked at him, he says, I will make you fishers of men. And then he also gives Peter probably the nickname of all nicknames when he says, I tell you, you are Peter. Peter means rock. Peter is the original, the rock. I know the rock who's out there in that. Peter was the original. Best nickname of all time. I mean, you talk about an upgrade to go from Simon to the rock. That's pretty good. When does he tell Peter this? After he's become the hero in the church, or when he's still the guy on the journey? See, one of the things I love about Jesus, if you read through the stories, he's always looking for those places where he goes, man, I see something in you guys you don't see. You're going to be fishers of men. You're going to be doing what I'm doing, even at a greater level. He goes, Peter, you're the rock. You're the man you've always longed to be, but you're going to need to depend on me in the process. That regular encouragement that he does with it. And then the final part he does with them is he sends them out on a mission. With that, and we know that Matthew 28, he says, go into all the world. If you look at the parts of it on the mission with it, the 3 parts, he gives them vision, direction, and connection. Vision. We're going to take this worldwide. Direction. Hey, start in Jerusalem, then go to Judea, then go to Samaria, then go to the ends of the earth. Connection. The last line he says to him, remember when he sent him out on the Great Commission, the last line he says, hey, behold, lo, I'll be with you always. Because I think they're freaking out a little bit at this point. Jesus is about to take off. He goes, hey, we're about to go worldwide. I want you guys to take the message out. And the very last thing he does, that word lo, it's an interjection. There's no grammatical value. He just uses it. It's your way of going, hey, look at me. I want your attention. You ever do that with your kids? Like they're scattered and that, and you go, hey, look at me. Sometimes I do it preaching. I'll go, hey, look up here. That's all he's doing with the disciples. He said, I want you to go. You're going to make disciples. You're going to do it worldwide. You're going to baptize them. You're going to teach them. And I think at that point, they're a little wigged out. And they're going, what is he worldwide and all that? I mean, we can barely keep our act together. And then he goes, hey, look at me. Lo, I'll be with you. You're not on your own. We got a connection with this. I think it's one of the strongest things we could do as we're investing in men is that combination of encouragement, but also the combination of commitment. I'm in your court. I'm with you. You're not doing this alone. How many times I'll call my sons and go, hey, you're not in this alone. I don't know what you're facing. I'm with you. I'm always here. We're connected. There's guys in my life that invested in me. Every so often they'll reach out, and sometimes I'll reach out to them. I always know they're for me and they're with me. And you look at how Jesus did that in their life. So in the remaining time, we don't have long. I just want to walk you through, and I want you to be thinking about, okay, if this is how Jesus did it with Peter, how am I doing these things? How am I doing these principles with that? And so, how are we calling men into a relationship with them? And so for some, a continuation. Be willing to help a man as he takes the next step. If you know somebody, they've been in the church their whole life, I promise you they have a next step. Are you helping them with it? Maybe you know a guy that you need to confront him. You need to be the voice of God and speak directly into his life that, hey, dude, I'll tell you why your life's not working, because you were doing the opposite of what the designer of life has said. And you speak into it. Or here's a key one, confirmation. Be willing to show that Jesus is true in how you live. Do you realize, for those of us, especially here in the Bay Area, if you're a Christian in the Bay Area and somebody knows you're a Christian, somebody is making a decision about Jesus Christ based on how you live. They're deciding whether this whole thing's true or not based on what they see in you. Now, it doesn't mean you have to live a perfect life, because the core of Christianity is grace, but you need to live a real one. How are you confirming that in other guys' life as God uses you to call them to himself? Secondly, we must choose to equip with intentionality. We must do it the same way that Jesus did. So how do we do that? One, make it a priority to invest relationally in other men. Where are you carving out time for other men? If the Savior of the world, who was here to die on a cross and rise again, could carve out 3 years with other guys, what is on your agenda that's more important than that? I'll do that time. This is all good stuff, but I'm so busy, God. I'm busy with this. And then every time God hits me and goes, I came and I died for the whole world, and I carved out time for other men. Because it's that important. So make it a priority. Find 1 or 2 men that you can strategically mentor. Jesus narrowed down to his 3. You're not going to be able to strategically mentor a horde of people. There may be a couple of guys in your life. It may be a son in your household right now. It may be a young man at work. It may be somebody around this table. Maybe somebody brought in your life. They're going through a hard season. But think, okay, who can I come alongside and do that? And when you do that, it's not rocket science on it. Teach, train, correct, restore. You're just kind of doing these voices in their life. And as much as anything, I just tell you, men desperately need regular encouragement. They desperately need it. That's the one thing I've realized with my sons. As a dad, I am prone to correct. I think that's just, hey, man, let's work on your grades. And it hit me the other day. I was like, are they hearing correction out of my mouth more than encouragement? I have the strongest encouragement voice in their lives. Am I using it? Literally, there is no one else that has a more powerful, encouraging voice in my sons' lives than me. I have a megaphone. Same is probably true at work, depending on your position. You have one of the most powerful voices on your team. You're one of the most powerful. There's a young man around you that looks to you and listens to you. Are you encouraging? And it can be life-changing. I remember when I was in high school, I was in the band, not a band. A band is cool, the band not so cool with it. I was in the band, and I remember it was end of my junior year, and our band director was awesome though. I mean, he was this cool guy. He smoked a pipe, which at a Christian school was really kind of radical at the time. And Mr. Edie, everybody loved him. He'd been a college baseball player, so he loved sports and that. Just a good all-around guy. I remember we're at this big award ceremony at the end of the year, and he's got to go up and give Band Member of the Year award ceremony. And it's the end of my junior year, and so I looked at him, I said, because I would hang out with him, I said, who are you giving the award to? And he said, I'm giving it to Jennifer. And I said, oh, that makes sense. Senior, she's a great musician. And he said, I debated it this year. He said, I almost gave it to you. And I laughed, and I said, Mr. Edie, I'm not that great a musician. And he kind of shook his head, and he goes, you don't get it, do you? He goes, you're my leader. He goes, I have tons of musicians. I have very few leaders. Don't ever underestimate that. And he walked up and gave the award. Guys, I remember that like it was yesterday because it was life-defining for me. For a kid who grew up without a dad and trying to struggle to figure out who I am, to have a man speak into my life and look at me and go, you're a leader. Man. In a lot of ways, I can look at it, the trajectory of my life, of that voice of encouragement. He probably doesn't even remember the day. You have people around you that your voice is more powerful than you realize. How are you using it? How are you encouraging them? And then the final part, how are we sending them out? Jesus sent them out on a mission. How are we sending guys out? We want to send them out in the same way he did. We want them to have vision of what it means to be a man. And we need to be pointing younger men, it's great to be a man. It's awesome. Yes, there's challenges. Yes, it can be abused. Yes, men have done things in history. We don't want to do those things. We want to learn from those things. But I'm telling you, it's great to be a man, and it's awesome to have the privilege of being a godly man who gets to be in a home, gets to be at work, gets to be at church. Give them a vision for this greatness that God's called them to. With that, follow it some direction. I love that Jesus, he goes, man, you guys are going to start in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria. You're going to take this thing to the ends of the earth. If you study military history, they have this thing called commander's intent on a major campaign. And so in World War II, at the end of World War II, when they started paratrooping everybody in, here was the commander's intent. We're taking Berlin at all cost. So a group, man, maybe this group of paratroopers, they get lost over this, they get off course. Everybody there goes, okay, I know what our end goal is. I know what we're going to do. And I love that Jesus, before he takes off, he looks at his disciples and he goes, let me tell you commander's intent. We're going to start in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and then just take the planet. Take it to the ends of the earth. And if you ever look up and you go, man, okay, what am I supposed to do? Oh yeah, all right, we keep taking the planet for him in every sphere. in every part of life. In the same way, our sons and young men, do we give them not just vision with that, but go, hey, let me tell you what next steps look like for you. Let me tell you some of the roadblocks in college. Let me tell you when I started at this company, man, let me give you 3 mistakes I made. You don't want to make these. Let me tell you the 5 things I wish I had done financially when I was in my 20s. Man, if I'd just pull you aside, take it or leave it. Let me give you, it's just mapping out some sections of the course for them so they don't have to make the same mistakes. And then the final part, send them out with a plan for connection. I am here for you. Man, they need to hear that. Because every guy struggles with a certain level of loneliness that we all think we got to figure it out alone. And none of us make it alone. I remember the day I'd just taken the lead pastor role as a big church back in Little Rock. And they had announced it, and I was following Robert Lewis, the guy who started men's fraternity, all that stuff. So, man, I'm stepping into big shoes, and it was intimidating and that. And I'll never forget one of the guys that came down right after the service. He slipped me his phone number. He said, hey, I know a little bit about what you're going through in a different sphere. I didn't know at the time he was the CEO of a Fortune 200 company. And he had taken over big shoes and actually led the company in unbelievable growth. It was the largest employer in the city and the state and all that. But he came and he goes, I can identify. And I'll never forget the words. He said, I'm in your foxhole. No matter what you face, I'm in your foxhole. And it wasn't just one of those, after church, nice thing to say. Because 20 years later, he's still in my foxhole. I can call him in a moment's notice. I probably learned more about organizational leadership from him than any other person. I'd go down to his company and go, hey, walk me through boards. Walk me through this. Walk me through how you do this part within leadership. The times that we've had to call about each other's lives and families and things that are going. The part I take with me, even though we live in different parts of the country, I know that phrase, he is with me, he is for me, no matter what. Do you have someone in your life like that? Maybe the greater question, who would say you're that guy? That you took the initiative and you go, yeah, I'm in your foxhole. Because none of us make it alone. Guys, God has not designed life to try to weed men out. He's designed it in his church to send them out. But it takes other men investing in men for that to happen. And so why don't we take some investment right now and dive into groups and process some of this together. Thanks, gentlemen.